That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to go through and we're going to be checking out some of these dominant fantasy teams, going through and creating some trades, looking at waiver wires, and really talking about how you should be optimizing your roster if you are currently on the path to get to the fantasy football playoffs. This is something that I think so many people overlook, and understanding where you currently sit in your own fantasy league, knowing that if you're a 7-1 roster or a 2-6 team, you should have drastically different goals in roster construction and when you should be putting points in your lineup. And on these 7-1, 6-2 rosters that we are going to be checking out right now, we are going to be trying to identify trades that we can make to go for that long-term fantasy football upside. But of course, you know, before we get into it, I have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats for people who went down there, dropped a like, and left a comment on the last video. These 2 free hats going out to Ryan and Caleb. Thank you so much. Of course, if you win that hat, just send me that email ASAP with your physical address so I can get you that hat shipped out. And also, I will just be completely honest, one of the main reasons I'm making this video is because I am being extremely lazy here, where I've been spending hours on hours on hours every single day recording podcasts for people joining the flock over there on Patreon. Because when you join the flock on Patreon, not only do you get a Fantasy Flock Network hat, you get our rest of season rankings, but you actually get an in-depth podcast where I go through and I break down your fantasy team. I have so many to make right now that we're having to include some of these on this video. That way we can kind of double dip. We can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We can get a video out and get these Patreon podcasts out at the same time. So of course you can always join the flock on Patreon, get access to so many cool things, including an in-depth podcast breaking down your fantasy team in the description of the video. And also join Underdog Fantasy down there. When you join Underdog Fantasy and you make your first deposit with promo code FLOCK, they actually match you dollar for dollar up to $100 deposit. And they have a ton of cool player props. You can get into some drafts with us over there that can also be found in the description of the video. But yeah, let's just go. Let's dive into it. Let's pull up our first team here. This is going to be coming out from Not First Noel. And I believe this roster is going to be currently 6-2 or 7-1. And let's just dive right into it, starting off at the quarterback position. Keep in mind, this is a super flex format. So in a super flex league, quarterback is going to be drastically different with how many we're rostering, as well as trying to identify those players with that top end level upside and job security. So at the quarterback position, we have an injured Russell Wilson. I will say really quick, I think that Russell Wilson's the perfect trade low candidate for a super flex contending team where we know we're going to the playoffs. Because yeah, you're not going to get Wilson this week on bye. Maybe we don't get him the week after that, but a big thing that I want to discuss, and just the theme of this video right now, is if you're currently a 6-2, 7-1, 8-0 roster, why I think that long-term upside matters so much more than production right now is knowing that if you are 7-1, you already have a team that is drastically better than the rest of the league. So if we can be structuring the roster around that fantasy football playoff level upside, it doesn't really matter if we make some trades now that are going to hurt the roster in the short term. Say you go and make a trade now, you roster players like Russell Wilson that we know are going to give you that elite production in the fantasy football playoffs, but we don't get the production right away. Who the hell cares if we go from being an 8-0 team in the next 7 weeks, instead of just winning every single matchup? Say worst case scenario, we go to a team that's only winning half of our games. Okay, well, worst case scenario, say we go 3-4 until we get to the fantasy football playoffs, then still you're looking at a roster that is going 11-4 as its record into the playoffs. So you're guaranteed that playoff spot, probably going to get a bye. And at the same time, if we structure our team in a way that we have more points during that playoff stretch, we're going to be dominant during that time period. So yeah, that's why we're going to love Russell Wilson. And a team like this, we also have Derek Carr. Now, I will say for now, I'm not going to be looking to make any adjustments at the quarterback position. However, when we do get Russell Wilson back from the IR, I think that Derek Carr is actually going to be a quarterback that I'm definitely going to be looking to sell high on. And that with Derek Carr, he is going to be valued significantly higher than the combination of Trevor Lawrence and Kirk Cousins. And a big thing is with Henry Ruggs leaving this offense, I seriously have questions about the lack of speed that you currently have in Las Vegas and how it may affect defensive coordinators being able to maybe kind of shorten the field a little bit, not have to keep their safeties back, and make life a lot harder for Darren Waller over the middle, for Hunter Renfrow across the line of scrimmage, and also for this running game overall. So the loss of Henry Ruggs, I actually think makes a big difference here. Not just the big plays that Ruggs is going to give you himself, but also how he drives the entire efficiency of this offense. So once we get Russell Wilson back, and we'll already have the combination of Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, and Russell Wilson all through their bye week, what I would probably be looking to do is look to try to trade in a package Derek Carr with one of the tight ends on this team, someone like Mark Andrews, to try to go and get that elite level upgrade at tight end, or we could do it at running back. Essentially, Derek Carr will become an expendable asset for us here. Let's go and let's look at the running back position before we go over to tight end. And at running back right now, we currently have Joe Mixon, Myles Gaskin in the starting lineup. Now with Myles Gaskin, this is a running back that I actually kind of like this week. Y'all know we hated him coming into the season, knowing that Malcolm Brown would be in a committee here, and Myles Gaskin was not going to be a 3-down running back, and you don't want a committee running back on the Miami Dolphins. But nonetheless, with the injury to Malcolm Brown, I mean, Myles Gaskin all of a sudden has a workload that he simply was not seeing at the beginning part of the season. We also have Austin Eckler, so clearly Eckler's going to be that running back 1, Joe Mixon that running back 2. I mean, you have Myles Gaskin more so as the depth piece with this team. Down there on the bench, we have Miles Sanders for the long-term play, and then also Boston Scott. So you know what would actually probably make a little bit more sense with this team, knowing that we will be able to bring in Mark Andrews up to that starting lineup now, is I think if we can try to trade that Philadelphia Eagles backfield alongside with the combination in Derek Carr, keep in mind, this is for a super flex format. In a 1-quarterback league, you're never going to get anything for Derek Carr of substance. But let me pull up my rest of season rankings over there on Patreon and talk about why I think it's such a good spot to go through and try to move the combination of both Boston Scott and Miles Sanders. And a big thing is, I think that people really overrate whenever they are going to be getting every running back in a backfield in return. Like, that is something that I've found. For whatever reason, just if you're going to be trading, say, Dalvin Cook away and you're adding in Alexander Madison, or say you're trading away the combination of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, all of a sudden people are willing to drastically overpay. And I think it makes sense in the case of someone like Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, knowing the overall running back upside that you have in that backfield. But in the case of the Philadelphia Eagles running backs, or right now the Chicago Bears running backs, or the Kansas City Chiefs running backs, in theory, yes, now you are going to be getting that 3-down usage from someone like Khalil Herbert. But when David Montgomery comes back, I mean, this is maybe going to be more so a split backfield. So if anything, having both those running backs on your team isn't great, because they're both going to be roster cloggers that you really don't want to get into your starting lineup. I think we could see something similar here with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. But for whatever reason, when people are trading for both of them, they're kind of viewing it as, okay, well, I get to start Boston Scott now, I get to start Miles Sanders later. Yes, we get just the security at the position. So if we pull up our rest of season rankings over there on Patreon, and Noel, I know you are on Patreon, so of course you can just go over there and pull these up whenever you want. I think if we can try to move that combination and get up to the tier of any of those running backs, I mean, Saquon Barkley would be a perfect trade target for this list, just because, I mean, you know that we don't need that long-term production here. You could actually make a trade like this now if we really wanted to, with how dominant this team is, and get Saquon Barkley in, get that long-term playoff production when we know he will be that 3-down running back from his injury. If we can't get Barkley, we go with Henderson, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, James Robinson, Cordell Patterson. Those are our running back rankings 10 through 16. I think if we can make a trade and combine both Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Derek Carr in that scenario, knowing that we will get Russell Wilson later on in the season, raising the overall quarterback upside that we'll have. And then in the starting lineup, we can be starting the combination of Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, and Saquon Barkley. I think that'd be fantastic. Now, going over to the wide receiver position, not much to say, because we currently have Justin Jefferson and DK Metcalf. Love having both of these wide receivers because they are currently providing us stacks within this team, where you are getting the wide receiver 1 for Minnesota to go along with Kirk Cousins. You're getting the wide receiver 1 in Seattle to go along with Russell Wilson. So you're raising your ceiling with this respective roster by going through and making those correlated bets on those passing attacks. Now, what's also great, Davante Adams, and that's why I don't think we have to be worrying about the wide receiver depth. Of course, you missed Davante Adams this past week on the COVID list. This week, not that great of an option because Aaron Rodgers is going to be out. Still a top 5 guy, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I mean, you're going to be able to go through and you're going to be able to have essentially one of every single week, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, or Austin Eckler, or Joe Mixon on the bench here, with how strong this team will be after we go through and make that trade. And that's kind of what we want. We want to have that one stud on the bench. That way, as we get those injuries, as we get players in the COVID list, we have a 1-for-1 replacement, but we're not going overboard on the depth that we have at the very bottom of the bench. That way we can just go and churn the bottom of the waiver wire and try to find those players like Elijah Mitchell freely without having to cut any studs that we really care about. Now, outside of that, at tight end, we have the combination of Mark Andrews and Tyler Higbee. Kind of fine rostering both of these tight ends ends. I mean, they're every down players for very productive offenses. In the case of Mark Andrews, I'm a little bit worried about his value taking a dip down, considering the fact that he will be having more target competition in this offense than he has ever seen in his entire NFL career. But outside of that, this is a very strong team. Really, the only adjustments I'm going to be looking to make is trying to trade one of those tertiary quarterbacks like Derek Carr in a package with one of our running back backfields in the Philadelphia Eagles backfield, trying to get up to a 3-down bell cow running back. That way we can be looking at playing them in that flex mix every single week, knowing that we have more than enough quarterback value, especially with Russell Wilson coming back in the long term. I think if we add on one of those running backs that have that great playoff schedule for the end of the season, that'd be fantastic. But you sent us another team over here. This team's actually going to be a 7-1 roster. Let me pull this one up as well. And this 7-1 roster is not going to be a super flex format. This one's going to be a 1-quarterback league where we have Patrick Mahomes. In a 1-quarterback league where you have Mahomes, I know he has been very disappointing, but still, you only roster 1 quarterback. With Patrick Mahomes having his worst season so far of his career, he is still a top 3 quarterback in fantasy, and this has been his absolute floor. I mean, with Patrick Mahomes as a player that you're just rostering as that quarterback 1, no reason to have a backup quarterback. We're chasing that running back upside down there on the bench. And in the current starting lineup, we have Dalvin Cook, Chuba Hubbard, running back 1, running back 2. Down there on the bench, we have some long-term upside. This is the exact thing that I'm looking for in a 7-1 roster. We have Kareem Hunt. We have Javonte Williams. We have these running backs that may not necessarily be giving you that production right away that we're excited about getting in the starting lineup. But Javonte Williams is the perfect example of a player that we need to be valuing very highly on a 7-1 team, knowing that when this production matters for this roster, it's going to be weeks 15, 16, 17 when we have our fantasy football playoffs. Javonte Williams, by then, he will have taken over as the 3-down running back for the Denver Broncos, where we'll be able to start him alongside Dalvin Cook in this starting lineup. Going over to the wide receiver position, we have Cooper Kupp, Michael Pittman, Devontae Parker currently in the starting lineup. Down there on the bench, we have the long-term upside with Jerry Jeudy, Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Lockett will be in the starting lineup going forward. Just have him down here for now, considering the fact that he currently is on bye. And yeah, outside of that, I mean, at tight end, we have Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts, this is something that I definitely want to highlight, because with Pitts, we've gone and we've said a couple different things as the season progressed. Coming into the year, I was saying that Kyle Pitts, if you were drafting him above Mark Andrews, you were drafting him over TJ Hawkinson, if you were drafting him in the 4th round when those other tight ends were going in the 6th, it was one of the worst picks in fantasy drafts. I mean, among the hundreds and hundreds of best ball drafts that we did coming into the season, I took Kyle Pitts in about 2 of them. And I'll say this is worst case scenario. Calvin Ridley leaving this offense. I mean, for myself, where we don't have Kyle Pitts in that many leagues, because best ball, you can't make trades. I'll say in those regular leagues, y'all know we were screaming that Kyle Pitts was a great buy low candidate back in week 3, given the volume and the role that he clearly had in Atlanta and how it was going to translate to production later on. So I traded for Kyle Pitts in a couple spots at the beginning of the season. And here with Kyle Pitts, you have to get so damn excited with no Calvin Ridley in this offense and what it will mean for his guaranteed volume going forward in Atlanta. Now, I will say, yes, he was disappointing this past week, but I mean, that's a 1-week sample. If we go back a couple weeks ago, whenever we actually had him playing in London with no Calvin Ridley, you had Kyle Pitts dropping like over 100 receiving yards. You had him coming out with getting the 10 target performance. That's kind of what we should be expecting for Kyle Pitts going forward. I think this is a tight end that is clearly going to be getting close to 10 targets every single week. So yeah, I think that honestly, this is a roster. It's very boring. It's hard for me to say much here because I think you are constructing it in a way where we have that long-term upside. And I mean, we're already kind of rostering that player prototype of guys that we can't be putting in the starting lineup right away at a discount, like Kareem Hunt and Javonte Williams on the bench. So it's hard for me to tell you to trade away those plug and play pieces right now, like Chuba Hubbard and Zach Moss, because we actually kind of need them with this roster in particular, based on the other players that we've gone out there and prioritized having. So I hate to give you this answer. I actually think that we're probably not making any adjustments with this team. I think this is a clear contending roster. I think that the roster construction is optimal, only having 1 quarterback and 1 tight end when those are elite level options, prioritizing the long-term running back upside on the bench with some of those young wide receivers that could pop as well, and a guy like Jerry Jeudy. I hate to say it because obviously, I mean, it's the worst thing that I could ever do for anybody on Patreon. I feel so bad when someone joins Patreon, joins the flock for a breakdown of their team through a podcast. Of course, they still get rest of season rankings, get in our group chat, get a ton of things. But one thing I feel bad about is when I'm breaking down that team in a podcast format and I'm like, you know what? I can't change anything here. This is perfect. I know it doesn't help you. I wish I could say something, but I think that every pillar you're hitting, it's completely optimal. So no, from a roster construction standpoint, there's nothing I'm adjusting with that team. And now let's bring up our last team. This is going to be coming out from Venomous. Now, thank you, of course, so much for being a part of the flock. Maybe we mixed up a roster or two here, but we're going to be covering all three of these. And now let's go over to the Tom Brady-led roster where we have Brady in at quarterback. Obviously, we're going to be picking up a bye week fill-in for this week and this week alone. But what I love to see with Brady is if you're betting on the quarterback that will win with passing volume, you have to be stacking him with your team. Someone like Jalen Hurts, someone like Lamar Jackson. I'm fine if you don't want to sack them, knowing that they can get there from a fantasy football standpoint by not even necessarily going out there and throwing the ball with great efficiency. Rather, they can get there just based on their rushing production alone, and that may not correlate to the other wide receivers in the offense. But no, Tom Brady is the exact opposite of that example. Brady will be someone that if he hits in fantasy as he has done so far this season, you know that he's going to be bringing a couple of those wide receivers up as well. Someone like Mike Evans is the perfect example of someone to go to. Now, at the wide receiver position outside of Evans, we currently have Cooper Kupp, the wide receiver 1 overall. Clearly, this is why this team is a very strong contender. Down there in the double flex spot, we definitely are going to prioritize getting the wide receiver with this build rather than running back. We currently have Courtland Sutton, Tyler Lockett, and then a few more spots down, we're going to have Hunter Renfrow. I actually think that Renfrow, Laviska Shenault, these wide receivers are valuable in this format in particular because as we go through the bye weeks, as we suffer some injuries, Hunter Renfrow will be a player that definitely makes an impact in that second flex spot more times than not. Like just this week alone, think about it. You're going to have no Mike Evans. You're going to have no Tyler Lockett. So where are we really going to be making the adjustments? I mean, are we going to be playing someone like, Tony Pollard in the flex? No, we're going to be putting Hunter Renfrow there in a PPR format. I will say that Renfrow, I would probably be looking to sell high. We discussed this previously in another video today, and we've said this so many times on the live streams this week. I'm sure you're tired of hearing us say it by now, but the loss of Henry Ruggs, not going to be changing my expectations with Hunter Renfrow too much. I actually think that Renfrow is just going to be in line for exactly what we have seen so far this season. Maybe he gets an extra target or two per game, but Henry Ruggs was only averaging 5 targets a game. It's not like this was a wide receiver getting a ton of passing volume. And with Hunter Renfrow, I actually think the efficiency is going to be driven down, knowing that they no longer have that vertical threat in this offense. They kind of play two completely different positions. So it's one of the rare instances that I actually think seeing the wide receiver be removed from the offense doesn't necessarily help the other wide receivers in the Henry Ruggs departure for Hunter Renfrow. And I know a lot of people in fantasy have the exact opposite opinion, which is fine. It just represents an opportunity for us to possibly go out there and upgrade and find that profit room somewhere else. And this is where Darrell Williams comes in, because with Darrell Williams, of course, you're not getting a massive return for him, but I want to be highlighting these players like Khalil Herbert, Darrell Williams, Chuba Hubbard. I mean, any of these running backs that we don't necessarily think are going to be putting up points in a month. I mean, they are no value to us at all, knowing that this team is already on its way to the fantasy football playoffs. And the only thing that matters is week 15, 16, and 17 production. Like, hell yeah, go give me Alexander Madison over Darrell Williams, knowing if we're talking about the just highest ceiling possible for any of these running backs for weeks 15, 16, and 17, you're going to be willing to bet on one of those premium running backs with someone like AJ Dillon, Alexander Madison over Darrell Williams, or you could also try to move him in a package to a team that currently is extremely running back needy, whether they had an injury to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Kareem Hunt, James Robinson, Miles Sanders, probably a couple other running backs that I'm mentioning. Right now, you could probably get some value for Darrell Williams. If we could package him together with Hunter Renfrow to get a long-term upgrade at wide receiver there, that'd be fantastic. Of course, you can go pull up my rest of season rankings on Patreon. I know you're on Patreon, so you have access to these, but I think the wide receivers that we'd be looking at in return would be in the tier of guys like wide receiver 31 to about wide receiver 27. I actually think Calvin Ridley would be a very intriguing buy low candidate. Obviously, you have the downside risk that Calvin Ridley may not play this year, but at the same time, if we're talking about production that only matters for weeks 15, 16, and 17, Ridley's going to be a perfect example of who the hell knows. I mean, I would say that there's a decent chance that we get him back by then. If we could go through and make a pivot off of, say, Hunter Renfrow and Darrell Williams to a wide receiver that will definitely produce more if he is playing during that time period, I think that makes a lot of sense. At tight end, we have Mike Gesicki and Darren Waller. Darren Waller coming out of his bye will definitely give us a good sell high opportunity with Mike Gesicki. I mean, with Gesicki here, this was a tight end that we said to sell high going into this last week against the Buffalo Bills, because adding back Devontae Parker, adding back Will Fuller in a couple weeks will be taking that target volume away from Mike Gesicki. You're never going to be excited about playing the tight end in the flex spot. What makes Mike Gesicki so valuable is the points per game that he gives you, but he is tight end eligible, so you can stick those in a position where you're not necessarily expecting great output from. But when you have Darren Waller here, Waller is going to be someone that we're just just plugging and playing every single week, regardless of matchup. Even though he has been disappointing as of late, I still think you're going to get that bounce back performance from Darren Waller. So if we could look to try to move Mike Gesicki in a package as well, possibly trying to package Mike Gesicki with another one of these wide receivers like Laviska Shenault to find an upgrade that way, I think that would make a ton of sense. In just that we're looking at this roster, I mean, as a long-term hit with Michael Thomas now being ruled out for the season. And if we could go through, make that upgrade for a league that has a double flex spot, that's going to all of a sudden bring us in a wide receiver that you can start every single week. And you're not really going to be negatively impacted at all, knowing that for weeks 15, 16, 17 in particular, which is all we care about, I mean, you aren't going to be starting Mike Gesicki in the flex. We will have Darren Waller in that starting tight end spot. So we're just kind of figuring out how we get better wide receivers for those flex spots. Running back, we're completely fine. We got Aaron Jones. We got Ezekiel Elliott. We got AJ Dillon. I mean, we have Tony Pollard. We have some long-term upside at the running back position. Don't need to be making too many adjustments here. I think this team's strong overall. I just think the play is try to sell some of that running back depth, try to sell Mike Gesicki as well, try to get those upgrades at the flex spot for those fantasy football playoff pushes in particular. Some intriguing plays as well. If we wanted to trade for a running back, Javonte Williams, as we previously discussed, I think would be the perfect trade target. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much, of course, for supporting the channel. Thank you for being a part of the flock. I really hope that this podcast / video helped you out. And yeah, of course, we'll have our rest of season rankings updated on Patreon every single week. I hope that will be able to help you for that playoff push as well. And we'll be live streaming every single night. I'm going to be trying to get as many posts on Patreon for Q&A sessions that we possibly can. And I think that should be it. And of course, everybody that watched this video, thank you so much for supporting the channel. And you can always consider joining the flock on Patreon anytime, whenever. Also, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK. Go check out some player props. Go get into some drafts with us. You can find the link in the description of the video for that as well. Drop that like, leave that comment, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you out in the live stream tonight.